to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's more to you than you think.
JP, my brother.
Aubrey.
What's going on, man?
I just going around coughing into people's mouths, keeping myself busy.
Yeah. You know how freaked out people would be if you just randomly kiss raped them at this point? That's like the worst thing you could do right now.
I would, any form of, Aubrey, take a breath. Any form of rape is usually about the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But now, if you just made out with somebody, they would fucking flip out. I mean, normally you should flip out. That's inappropriate.
Yeah.
And you should never do that. But now, if someone just kissed you, you'd be like, you motherfucker.
So apparently there was a lady in Florida who, like in a bar that's open in Florida, she like randomly kissed 3 guys.
That's what I'm talking about.
And then called the cops for the bar not practicing social distancing. And it's in Florida. So of course that happened. Then she probably ate their faces off.
From the bath salts.
Yeah, indeed.
There's multiple risks with people opening their mouth inappropriately and attacking you in this time, and this is definitely one of them. Fucking strange times, man.
It's super strange times. I think this is one of those times where we'll be 90 and we'll look back and still have the memory of this. Like this will be a blip on the radar that still stands out. It's memorable, and hopefully we can look back and, learn from what we needed to learn, but also learn from how we played into what seems like it is becoming a level of ridiculousness. So hopefully we can learn from the mistakes, learn from the successes too.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we were talking about briefly before this is a really an opportunity to study a lot of things globally. Yeah. Obviously there's learning about the virus. There's tons of information that's constantly emerging from the initial reports and statistics and extrapolations of what this might be to what we're actually seeing, and just learning from that, which is important. We need to learn. But then there's also like a lot of other effects. We can learn the economic effects of something like this. We can learn what the other ancillary costs of something like this might be, and all of the lockdown and all of those other measures, and really get some information about what the response cost is, what the actual, virality of this thing is. And then even more curiously, look at like what the proliferation of this amount of fear extended across the world. Like, what is the cost of that?
Dude, nothing makes people dumber than being afraid. And I get afraid all the time. I get really dumb all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there's a psychological pretty well fact that when you're afraid, your prefrontal cortex gets diminished. The excitement of it being online to help you think intelligently gets diminished. I know
you don't have time for that shit.
Exactly.
It's time to run. It's time to fight. It's time to fuck.
Exactly. So to get a disaster to happen, get people really afraid, and then make decisions from the fear, rather than like having fear and being a Zen master and dealing with the fear. But if you don't do that, then you start making decisions from the fear. And when you debrief it, you start to see a lot of stupid things happen when we act out of fear, because we're literally stupid when we're afraid. And I get that. Like, I'm not shaming scared people. I'm
we've
not
all
shaming
been
myself
stupid
when
and all
I'm
been afraid.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and that's something that I think really is the key thing here. Let's everybody just calm down a little bit and like think logically and rationally and like acknowledge your fear. Because the first thing about fear is if you don't acknowledge that you're afraid, it's going to really run amok.
Yeah.
The first thing is like, oh, okay, I'm afraid. And then, all right, well, let's maybe have some laughs, and maybe like look at our own mortality with a little bit of ease instead of this, all right, yeah, we're all going to die, and this is a new threat, and it's a real threat, and we're not COVID deniers here.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. You were just talking to me about somebody that very close to you, whose father is sick.
Yeah.
And like we all have people a few degrees of separation where this is very real. So it's not like it's not a real thing, but also there's lots of real dangerous things in this big, scary world that's trying to, eat us and smash us and all different sorts of things that are constantly around. So we just have to look at it in perspective and not, because this is new, say like, this is the boogeyman. It's a boogeyman.
Yeah. As soon as we're born, we are at risk of dying. And our fear is meant to protect us from things that could kill us. And when we look around in our daily lives, thank God we don't regularly acknowledge all the things that could kill us. I jump in my car and we pretend that traffic deaths don't happen, but I think it's 3,500 traffic deaths a day in the US. It's just like, wow, a lot of people die. And you had a near-death experience. And
I did. I lost my cousin to a drunk driving accident when I was in high school. I was really close to him, my cousin Eric. Like, it's hit really close to home. Almost took my life, took my cousin's life. It's a real fucking factor.
Yeah. And if we let fear in all those areas control us, we wouldn't be driving our cars. Way more people would start starving because nobody's driving. We're all afraid, so we can't transport food. So people are going hungry, dying of starvation. Yet, luckily, we don't do that. We are with COVID, but we don't do that with all the other things that could kill us because luckily, we as a society act intelligent most of the time.
Yeah.
And now we're getting to, I think, go through a master class in learning about fear. And I think as we look at like the externalization, what's going on in the macro, maybe it's a big reflection of what's going on in the micro internally to show us how we relate to fear within ourselves. It's easier to see when it's on the outside of us because our eyes point outward. They don't point inward. But I think what really counts is for us to connect with who's looking through our eyes. And it's like, yeah, I can criticize what I judge to be the ridiculousness of fear-based decisions going on with the pandemic based on the new numbers we actually have now. Yet I would be blind if I didn't acknowledge how I do that to myself. And for me, part of the masterclass is learning about my relationship with fear. Where am I hijacking my intelligence and not just having fear, but acting out of fear and making reactive decisions out of fear?
Yeah. What's interesting is like, I certainly have still a lot of fear in my system, and I'm aware of it, and I still can't necessarily beat it. And what's interesting is one of my like verticals of fear that is really a constant pillar is fear about getting sick, right? And anybody around me knows that. Now, my fear about getting sick is based in when I'm sick, I'm less productive, I'm doing less. And if I'm doing less, I love myself less because I think that my own worth as a human being and as a man is based upon what I do and not who I am. And that's something I've been working on a lot.
No, that's true. That's exactly how it is.
I got it right.
Don't erase that program. That's accurate.
So what that ends up leading to is I'm constantly afraid of just getting a cold or getting the flu. So I'm constantly sanitizing and washing my hands before this happened because I'm like really worried about that lack of productivity that would come from me being sick. It's not even so much the symptoms or whatever. You take some Advil and you fucking sleep it off, watch some movies, whatever. That's all fine. But me not being able to do a podcast like this or like perform is fucking terrifying to me. But I also recognize that as I'm constantly sanitizing my hand, throughout the last, fucking 10, 15 years, it's like I'm washing my hand. I'm putting a little bit of fear on my hands and just rubbing it in. And yes, it might have some modicum of benefit in the short term in case I encountered a pathogen, but long term, I'm lathering myself with fear all the time.
Yeah. And making yourself look like a sissy, Aubrey. So with that,
I love myself even less now.
Well, you're not lovable. So for you, it sounds like the real fear isn't the fear of getting sick, but it sounds like the fear of being unproductive, which means your fear is, I'm afraid I wouldn't be worthy if I'm not productive.
Right.
Dude, that's so empowering to just know.
Yeah, it is.
It really, Ram Dass's wisdom, the late, great Ram Dass, you can't get out of a jail you don't know you're in. You can't get out of a jail made of your own fear until you know you're in it. So I think my delusional ego, and maybe some people can relate to this, otherwise I'm just the only fuck up that gets scared. So my delusional ego says, if I acknowledge my fear, I'm giving it power. And therefore it says, if I can just deny the fear, if I can deny that I'm, in this jail of fear, if I can deny that, I'm not afraid of being unworthy, my ego thinks there's power in that. Yet I think there's control. I think the sense of power is truly suffocation, and it's a temporary sense of safety, because anytime we obey the fear, become obedient to it, we get the short-term effect of feeling safer. That's the fear controls us. Therefore, we feel safer, less afraid than if we were unobedient to the fear. Yet, to me, the real empowerment is when we have the courage to recognize the fucking jail of fear we're in. I have a fear of being unworthy too. Like I'm way more productive than is for my own good, because I am I'm there with you. I'm afraid of being unworthy. And I link so much worthiness to productivity as well.
Yeah. I think it's a pattern that we all fall in. And to go talk about something else that you're saying, like if we don't acknowledge our fear, it would be like if you think there's a monster under your bed, but you just leap up on top of the bed and don't look under that motherfucker, it's going to terrify you.
It's just 10 hours of torture for the next the whole
like
night.
Good luck sleeping if you really think there's a monster under there and you don't acknowledge it. Be like, okay, I'm a little bit scared of what's under the bed. I'm going to look, even though I'm a grown-ass adult, and see if there's anything under the bed. And it's the same. I mean, that's not a real example for most people. I mean, maybe kids actually believe that, but for us, like if I hear something banging on my house outside that's unusual, I will get my gun and my flashlight and I'll look, and I have no expectation there's going to be anything, but acknowledging, wow, that kind of scared me. Let me go check it out and just make sure that nobody's trying to home invade and break in my house. Then I can sleep fine. Then I can, maybe I'll, burn a little Palo Santo or cinnamon stick or something and be like, okay, everything's cool, bro. Like, you're all good.
I just picture, like, we're in Texas, by the way. Picture you have your boxers on, bathrobe, and you like holster your gun in your front waistband as you're doing the Palo
boxers,
Santo.
bro.
No boxers.
Both guns out.
Just both guns. Unconcealed.
Yeah. I'm going to scare somebody one way or another. I don't know, man. It's just it's like you have to address it. You have to deal with it.
So if we pretended that we become enslaved to our own fear and we're obedient to our own fear, anytime we're denying our fear or simply acting from the fear. First off, that's my opinion. I'm curious, does that resonate as somewhat true for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first step is just acknowledging and just being humble enough to say, oh, I'm scared. And being scared is going to cause a cognitive bias. It's going to cause a shift actually in our brain and the priorities of the different parts of our brain and the way that we're perceiving the world. The movie that we're watching will be different when we're afraid. And like you have to engage in that. Like if you watch a horror movie and you put yourself in a place where you're just constantly reminding yourself, this is a movie, and you don't get lost in the movie, the shit's not scary and the movie's terrible. Yeah. It's like, this movie's lame. The plot sucks. Like why? It's like the Geico commercial. Like, why are they hiding in the shed? Don't you just run down, get away. Like don't hide in the shed full of chainsaws, you idiots. Like this movie's terrible. Doesn't make any sense. But if you're there, you're like, oh my God, not the shed with the chainsaws. Yeah. And it's just, you get lost in the movie of your own perception.
Indeed. So and for me, something I see all the time within myself is when I do that magic step of have awareness about my fear, I might feel the fear more, yet the paradox is there's less fear, because if there's a fear there that's going unacknowledged, where we're at is we're afraid to be afraid. which means we've got fear squared. There's so much of it that we're overwhelmed by it, so we can't perceive it. And and I think that's when we get rigid. We don't feel afraid because we're numb to it, because it's just overwhelming our system. But I think when we can give ourselves the permission to have our birthright of being a human and be scared, cool. We've just transcended the level of being afraid to be afraid. Now we're allowing ourselves to be afraid. But if we're just afraid to be afraid, that means we're making all of our decisions from a secondary fear.
Yeah,
it's not even
compounding
the first
it.
one.
Yeah, compounding it dramatically.
And aside from awareness, I'm curious, in your experience, what are some of the antidotes to not being enslaved by one's fear?
Well, there's an amazing amount of research in the field of psychology on exposure and response therapy, where it's like you expose yourself to the fear and you actually find that you're less and less afraid of it. So like if you have an arachnophobia, like if you gently expose yourself by getting like a caged tarantula and like spending some time meditating with it, you have to be mindful not to overdo it, because there's too much exposure and you'll have a full panic attack, right? You don't want to cover yourself in tarantulas. That's a little extreme, but like maybe start with a picture,
like
or maybe
challenge, but not overwhelm.
Yeah, exactly. It's like almost like a hormetic stressor, like a little bit of cold therapy is great for you. You go 30 seconds in the shower, 3 minutes in a cold plunge, whatever your level is, that's great. But if you're out lost in a freezing wilderness and you're having to deal with it, there's going to be problems. Your immune system will no longer recover and adapt in a healthy way. So it's like the right amount of exposure to that fear is incredibly helpful. I've discovered that. I mean, ayahuasca is a great tool to use for that. I mean, the first time I did it, it was exposing me dramatically to my fear of death. I mean, I had visions of insects crawling in my eyes and laying eggs and exploding out of my ears and nose. And I was like, wow, that's terrible. I don't want that. And I was sliding down a vine of thorns naked and it was eviscerating me, genitals first. And I was like, that is horrible. Like all of these visions I had to expose myself to. Finally, ayahuasca was like, no, now you got cancer and you're going to die a slow, painful death. And I was like, no. Till finally I was like, okay, if I get cancer, I fucking have cancer. And then ayahuasca was like, nah, just kidding. And then it was like AWA and just hugged me and held me to the earth. It was like, you're good, bro. You're all good. And I was like, oh, thank God. And that was the exposure to my own fear of death that actually helped limit my fear of death. And that was really key. There's another story too. I was reading a report of a doctor, and I don't recall his name, but he's famous for being able to treat schizophrenia. And there was a guy who saw snakes everywhere and was terrified of snakes and could see snakes everywhere he looked. And so the doctor was like, all right, well, let me see if I can deal with it. So he had the permissibility to do a pretty radical treatment. This guy had full-blown schizophrenia. He was really, really struggling. The medications weren't working. So he has the guy, and then he goes to a pet store and he gets a bunch of docile snakes, actual snakes, and then he goes to a toy store and he gets a bunch of rubber snakes, and he creates a room that has a bunch of the real snakes and a bunch of rubber snakes, and then the guy who hallucinates snakes all the time, he puts the guy in the room. And the guy, this is an extreme treatment for an extreme case of schizophrenia. And I'm not like recommending anybody do this. This is not a recommendation. I'm just talking about a case report of a doctor who did this. And he leaves the guy, and the guy is obviously freaking out and like completely losing his mind, because he's got 3 different types of snakes: his hallucinated snakes, the rubber snakes, and the real snakes, all in the room. So eventually the doctor then takes the guy out. The guy calms down and he's like, all right, can you tell the difference between the hallucinated snakes, the rubber snakes, and the real snakes? And the guy was like, yeah, that's a real snake. This is a rubber snake. These ones are the hallucinated snakes. And he's like, great. Now you know that your snakes that you're seeing are not real. And it ended up treating successfully the guy who had schizophrenia about these hallucinated snakes, because he realized like, oh, I can tell the difference between a real one, a rubber one, and a hallucinated one. And then he was able to like work through it, even in the most extreme case of fear.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I love the idea of, sorry, I have diseases. You're going to die. I love the idea of exposing ourselves to exactly what we're afraid of. And I also so value regularly exposing ourselves to simply the sensation of fear as well, preferably on a daily basis. And our psychotic, amazing friend, Tim Kennedy, his saying is just, to me, so wise. Hard times make strong people. Strong people make easy times. Easy times make weak people. Weak people make hard times. It's a life cycle. And Tim shared with me from his point of view, we've had really fucking easy times. And his point of view, and I agree with it, we have a lot of weak fucking people out there. And I'm not pretending to be Mr. Green Beret Tim Kennedy. Like I'm 99% weak, and I'm working on the 1% strong. And
if you watch my fucking hand washing pre-COVID, you would say the same thing about me.
I will. You're very weak, Aubrey. You fucking hand washer. So, disclaimer, please wash your hands. Inject Lysol too, you fucking Jesus. But so we've been living in easy times. Like we didn't grow up in the Great Depression, and I know everybody had different circumstances, yet the era we've been living is by comparison relatively easy.
No doubt.
Yet I don't think we need to obey the life sentence. Well, we've grown up in easy times, so I'm going to be a weak person. No, we can make ourselves really fucking strong. And a part of how we do that is exposing ourselves to things we're afraid of and just the emotion of fear in general. And that's, a couple days ago, I was doing the pedestrian bridge near Barton Springs, and I've jumped off it the past couple of years, but I've never flipped off it. There was a fear barrier. It's like, it's 25 feet. I've never done a backflip that high. I don't want to smack myself and I'm not going to do it. But I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was there. I was with a friend, and I just looked at him and said, I'm going to backflip this motherfucker. And the goal wasn't to do the backflip ideally. The goal was to conquer the fear of doing it. So exposing myself to what in all reality was this trivial fear for me went a long way, because cool, now there's that cross training. There's that, call it the heat tolerance to the fear that's built up. So, when I'm in the life situation where it really counts, I'll be less reactive to the fear, less obedient to the fear, and more centered and cool, I feel the fear, yet I'm not going to be afraid of this fear. I'm not going to be the slave to it, because I've exposed myself to the emotion of fear. And that's one of the reasons why I love cold therapy as well.
Totally.
Ain't from the cold, it's from the fear that comes up before you get into the cold.
And that practice of courage, courage is action, not retraction in the face of fear.
Yeah.
If you have that and it's not a fear that's going to kill you, the cold therapy is ostensibly good for you, unless you really have a compromised immune system and that hormetic stressor is too much, again, like we were talking about, but it's going to be fine. And that ability to do that, it just reinforces your own personal power, your own ability to navigate a world that is scary.
Yeah.
And I think for me, cold therapy is, was that. Still, obviously, there's those moments where oh man, am I really going to do this today? And all of those excuses and justifications why you shouldn't come through your head. And you're like, no, fuck it. And I've gotten good at that. So there's other things too, though, that I'll just put into my practice. One thing, I really don't like cockroaches or crickets. I just have a kind of immediate fear / disgust response when I see them. And when I recognize that and how much that was controlling me, because in Texas where I live, there's tree roaches, and the tree roaches have an amazing ability to squish themselves and get through all the cracks in my house, and they come out at night. And so it was really bothering me. And I was like, fuck it. I just got to grab one of these things with my hand and let it outside with my hand, instead of going through this whole fucking charade of some kind of cupping device and some kind of, I was capturing a poisonous insect that was going to, that's smart if you have a spider that you're trying to get out that might bite you. I get it. Don't grab it with your hand. That's actual danger. There's danger there. Don't do that. But if it's a cockroach, they can't fuck you up. Maybe if you ate it, you'd get a disease or something, but if you hold it in your hand, it's not going to fuck you up. So I would go through that process and just try and deal with my fear. And it's a gnarly little thing, a process of that, grabbing it with your hand. I'll get a little courage and I'll go to grab it, and then they'll wiggle and squirm. And sometimes they're in my hand and they'll fucking crawl their way out of this tiny little hole where my thumb isn't closing that part of my hand. Yeah. I'm like, oh God, why? God, why? And I'll just feel the fear shoot little tingly little barbs that go all through my body, like, oh, and then I'll be like, fucking gotta go do it again, do it right this time. And then if I can do it and I let it out, there's just this rush of like, wow, I am a bad motherfucker.
Yeah.
Look at me, look what I just did. And just, of course, some other person can just grab that and just let it out. Like, what's the big deal, bro? But for me, it is a big deal. And so there's growth there for me doing that.
It was your edge of fear that you encountered. And it doesn't matter, were you grabbing a tiger, a cockroach? It only matters because that's something that created the authentic emotion of fear in you.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, how soon after that did you wash your hands?
Immediately. And I think there's danger there. Those things are nasty. I don't want anything to do with those fuckers.
And what else do you do on a regular basis, whether it's daily or somewhat regularly, that provokes fear in you, but you have the courage ethos and you do the thing anyway?
I mean, I was in an open polyamorous relationship for 6 years. That was like a constant exposure therapy to my own fears of not being good enough, not being worthy enough, not being chosen, not being good enough in bed, not being all of these different things, which are deep psychological validation and attachment-based fears. And it was this massive 6-year journey, through my own fears. And I'll tell you, man, like there's not a fear that I had that I didn't get to experience in that. Mm-hmm. And I'm super grateful for that. It was gnarly and beautiful, but it was gnarly. Like if I was worried about something happening, that fucking thing happened, over the course of time and based on the rules and prerogatives of our relationship. Like whatever I was afraid of, it happened.
Yeah.
My partner falling in love, that happened. A super aggressive sexual lover, that happened. Some fucking gigantic dick slinging monster, that happened. Like whatever.
Was it that black dude with the meme?
Yeah, Barry. Barry. Yeah, Barry showed up. Like everything that could exist, like did exist, and so I had to deal with that. And it's not like I want to grab cockroaches for the rest of my life with my hand. I just want to get to the point where I'm over the fear and I know that I could.
Yeah.
And that it's okay if I could. And with the open relationship, I got to the point where I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Like I was okay with that. It's not, and this is actually news, but I'm actually with a new partner now and we're engaged. Breaking news to everybody. And we're taking our time before making it a public thing and introducing everybody, but don't worry, you'll get to meet her all.
Yeah.
And it's
by
been
the way,
beautiful.
so happy for you,
Thank you, brother. Thank you. It's been beautiful. But, I don't want to be in an open polyamorous relationship with her anymore. Now, if that was the way that it went and she was like, look, I really want to do this. Like I've dealt with that fear and I'm like, all right, babe, that's cool. Like we can do this. I put myself through the gauntlet of fire. And like, I can handle that. We can do that for a while if that's what you want, and because I love her in that way. And I trust myself. It doesn't mean I want to do it, but I could.
Yeah.
And that's a great sense of it's a great sense of confidence. And also for her, and she's also had her own experience in polyamory as well and is choosing monogamy now as well. But both of us have been there in that position where we'd be like, okay, this is a discussion now. Cool. Like we've dealt with this. We can deal with this again and do it a little better and deal with our own fear a little better. And so that's the place I think we want to be in. We want to be in a place where we have agency, where we can think rationally, where fear doesn't just overtake us and compel us.
Yeah. I love that. And I love how I think, especially in our relationship with fear, oftentimes life will balance itself out. So, polyamory used to be the fear edge. And now like you've become adapted to that fear.
Yeah.
Not to say that fear wouldn't be provoked if you went poly again, but like, cool. Now you're actually going on the other side. And though I'm not inside of you, I would anticipate like maybe monogamy is now the thing that will bring up fears. There'll be obviously a different fear. And, I think as an analogy, sometimes life says like, okay, to conquer your fears, you got to get your ass in the gym. You got to work your butt off, become the warrior. And you do that for a number of years. And now to conquer the next edge of fear, it's like, dude, you're beating yourself up in the gym. You're getting attached to your muscles. Your ego's really based. Now your thing, like, go do yoga for a phase. And the ego says, no, like I'll lose what I've gained. And like, but what used to be the fear conquering thing, oftentimes we need to go to the opposite side of the fence after a while in the next season in order to conquer the next fear. And I almost think if you wanted to be just a one size fits all life coach, people come in like, here's my challenge. And the life coach just says, do the opposite of what you're doing. I think some people, oftentimes we can even become comfortable in the discomfort of our chosen area if it's become familiar to us. So it's like people who meditate all the time, like, stop fucking meditating and go do CrossFit.
Yeah.
And people who like are only in their bodies, it's like, cool, go do a 10-day Vipassana. That's your balance. People who are like, I always need to be in a relationship. Cool. Your path now is go be single for a while. People who find comfort in being single, I'm safe, I'm protected. Jump into a relationship. That's your next edge.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice to give to people. And I would encourage people to just make a little list of like what you're afraid of that's not actually physically harmful or dangerous, right? Like make a little list and then think about it. Maybe you're afraid of looking foolish in public.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of, people who've talked about the benefits. And I think even Tim Ferriss talks about it, about negotiating for a price of coffee at Starbucks, right? Like it's an uncomfortable thing. Like, can I get $1 off? And just kind of see how uncomfortable that is. That would be hella uncomfortable for me even. And I should probably do it, be like, how about 50% off that oat milk latte right now?
And the disclaimer to really help people sit with their fear about that. I've done that.
You have? Nice.
It just as the fear exercise. But the disclaimer is you can't tell the cashier, I'm just doing this to conquer my fear.
No.
You have to own it. Like, can I have 50 cents off?
Yeah, totally. And if you're afraid of not looking good when you step out of the house, just fucking go out with your bedhead and like whatever pimple cream still on your face or like whatever you want to do to like make you more comfortable with that. One of my spiritual mentors, Ted Decker, he recognized that like the impropriety of doing certain things in public was constricting to him. And he really is he's committed to being as free as possible. So if he was out and there was music playing at like a cafe or a lunch place or whatever, and it would have been inappropriate to dance. And he's not a dancer. This is not Stephen Twitch Boss here, who's just going to put on a performance and get lauded by the public. He's like, I'm going to dance because this feels really awkward to me. And so he would do it and he would dance and people would look and some would smile and some would frown and whatever.
Yeah.
But for him, that was just breaking free and like, okay, like I felt that fear collapsing in on me.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to burst through with my action, not retraction. And I'm going to feel more sovereign and more confident. And now he doesn't need to dance every time he feels because he doesn't have that fear anymore. He knows that he can dance when he wants to, and it's okay.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me, I think it was about 2 years ago in Costa Rica, there was a transformational like networking thing that Amber was a part of. So I was there with her for the weekend. And at the end of it, there was like a celebration night, some drinks, and leading up to the night, they're going to be doing karaoke with a live musician playing the guitar. And he said, JP, do you want to sing a song? And I said, absolutely, I do. Now, I don't know how to sing, and I truly didn't want to sing this song, but I was afraid to do it. Yeah. And I decided that's I've got to do it. And I was 100% by far the worst performer that night. And I'll also share with you, as of this recording, the last time I was able to perform live comedy, it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, just the weekend before most of the lockdown initiated. And I had done 4 or 5 sold out shows throughout the weekend. It was just such a great time. People coming out who want to see me have a great time. The shows went phenomenally. And between my Saturday night shows, when they were changing the room over, one of the organizers, this was a comedy festival, said, JP, we've got a midnight show. It's the best of the Grand Rapids Laugh Fest coming in. It would mean a lot to us if you could do just like a 10-minute spot, because like I was just one of the bigger names. Mm-hmm. I so didn't want to do it because for several reasons. One, it's like, that means I'll get 2 hours of sleep because I have an early flight the next morning. I put my all into every show. Yeah. I've done 4 or 5 sold out shows. And then this is a midnight show on a Saturday, and typically that means the crowd's going to be drunk and not an ideal crowd. And you knew it was going to be a sparse crowd. It wasn't going to be a sellout.
No.
And here's my real fear. The people in that crowd, they weren't coming to see me. I didn't already have their approval.
Yep.
So I looked her in the eye and said, I'd be happy to do it. And it was only because I wanted to face the fear of performing for a much tougher crowd who didn't already know of me and love me. And it was uncomfortable. Like, it didn't go great. And I'm so glad I did it. It was very uncomfortable.
Yeah. If you let's think of fear as a virus, right? And you think of the virus, it's always in us. It's an endemic. We're always, to some degree, dealing with fear. And again, I'm not talking about the immediate fear that comes up when there's danger. Like, that's useful. Like, we all need that. We're not trying to get rid of that. It's a different response. I'm talking about the endemic fear about things that are not actually harmful to our physical body or anything that of our safety or security or any of these things. If you think of that as a virus, then you think of like the viral load being at a certain level. Well, it's universal. Whatever the cause of that is inconsequential. You have a viral load of fear in your body. And this virus is just a metaphor here, but imagine that. Or you could imagine it like a pile of marbles. And the viral load is like a pile of marbles that you have all the time. Well, anything that you do to take a few of those marbles and alchemize them into fucking whatever, rainbows and butterflies, whatever it alchemizes to, it's not the same marbles, it's not the same load. It works. So anything that specifically you do to overcome a fear, however fucking trivial it is, it takes some of that load out of your body, and you become more sovereign and less infected and less just saddled by this overwhelming burden of fear, which creates stress and creates all of these different poor physiological responses. Of course, it's been well studied, the shuttling of immune response to short-term, energy and strength versus with the cortisol to long-term immune restoration and benefit. There's all kinds of things that are happening physiologically, but also psychologically. And anything you do to take a few of those marbles, to take some of that viral load and just poof, burst it is going to be beneficial.
I think that's a beautiful analogy. Fear is a virus, and then illustration with the marbles. Because to me, it's so unrealistic to say, like, don't have fear. Well, as soon as we're born, we inherently have the fear of death, and anything we have the fear of loss. Yet, if the viral load is small enough, cool, we can function, and maybe our fears actually motivate us and make us better and help us serve other people more. But man, when we cross the line where the load is now, okay, now my actions, my thoughts, my relationships, they're really being steered with fear. And much like any virus, fear spreads.
It spreads so easily. Those words are the ways that we infect it. Those words and the attitude of somebody else in fear. We see somebody terrified of something, we're gonna be like, oh shit. We learn through that mimicry. And that's a big factor, and that plays a huge role. And you can look at it from the study of placebo versus nocebo science. Those people who have an attitude towards a different threat in their body and have the belief that they're going to get well, either by some pill or some intervention or just some inborn belief in their own strength, they're dramatically going to respond better than those who are saddled by fear and hopeless and ruminating on the despair and the chaos it's going to be in. It's placebo versus nocebo. This isn't some woo-woo thing. This is accounted for in every single clinical trial. That's why we randomize and double blind everything. It's because the placebo is fucking real.
Yeah.
And that's our attitude towards any given situation, and how important that is to just be mindful of managing that, and it's just like the body. At all times we have cancer cells. At all times we have viruses. At all times we got fucking E. coli in our system. Like, we're dealing with shit all the time, and our immune system's just knocking it out. But at a certain point, if it reaches a critical mass, then we have a fucking problem.
Yeah.
And it's the same with fear. Like, we're going to have it forever, but like, let's keep our system whole, hearty, healthy, and then keep it at a manageable level, and just do the proactive, preventative, like prophylactic measures against this by taking marbles of this fear and just getting rid of them whenever we can.
I agree. And And I think one step of awareness when we're afraid, which is hard to become aware of because oftentimes when we're afraid, we don't know it because we're afraid to be afraid. And it's like, this is just how I am. But if we can notice ourselves externalizing the fear and propagating it, just like any virus, it wants to spread. So, have you ever had you've gotten bad news that isn't about you personally? It's like, oh, this latest school shooting on the news, and you just start telling people about it. It's like, now we are spreading the virus of fear, which is a great telltale sign. Oh, we ourselves are afraid. I think those who don't know how to deal with the fear internally externalize it. And I think there's a psychological mechanism that happens where we make an assumption, and I don't think it's accurate, but we make an assumption. If I can put this fear onto enough other people, I won't have to deal with it. Just like people who unfortunately went through horrific abuse as a child, whether it's physical or sexual, sometimes they will grow up if it's undealt with, and at times they'll abuse other people. Statistically, they find 95% of child molesters were molested when they were children. Make no mistake, that doesn't mean 95% of children grow up to become child molesters. That's not the statistic. 95% of child molesters were molested as a kid. So the psychological mechanism is there's this abuse, I internalize, it's undealt with. And if I can make someone else the abuse victim, if I can make them carry the abuse, then I won't have to carry it anymore. Now, of course, no matter how many people you abuse, no matter how many people you scare, it's not going to offload your fear. Just like if you think of Freddie Mercury, who had AIDS, no matter how many other guys he butt fucked, it wasn't enough to offload the AIDS that he had.
Yeah, that's very true.
That is an accurate butt fucking analogy, Aubrey. Go wash your hands.
I had so many things to say to your whole rant, and then you busted out that analogy, and all of it just burst out of my mind. I was like, whoa.
So the moral of the story, too, is two morals. Don't have sex with Freddie Mercury. He's dead. It's going to be hard anyway. And number two, I think, and I want to own this because I can be better at it. Notice myself when I'm externalizing fear, whether it's with my wife, like, oh, did you see the latest bad news or wrecking Bill Gates? Or it's like, no, I need to be a man and deal with my own fears. And then talk about what's natural. If I still want to talk about it, cool. I'll talk about the same subject, but it'll be a much different energy, not one using the people around me to bleed off my fear onto.
There's also like a way that our ego gets involved in what we're afraid of, and still not acknowledging that we may be acting out of fear. Like somebody maybe really have a really kind of have an opinion about COVID, the virus, and be like, I'm not fucking afraid. Like, I do not give a shit about this. I'm not scared. I'm like, I'm not going to wear a mask. Like, I'm confident in my immune system and I'm good to go. But the way that they're analyzing the situation, they could be terrified of, tanks mobilizing in this kind of National Guard lockdown. Like, cause I remember getting emails from people who were like, we saw fucking tanks mobilizing. It's going to be full lockdown here. And like those emails fucking float out. And I'm like, whoa. Like, we sure about this? Yeah. But that's still the same as acting in fear as imagining that the initial statistics, which were like 4.5% mortality rates, and like believing that 2 million people were going to die and all this, like, it's just a different shift of fear. And it doesn't make you better because you're terrified. You see one fucking army moving some tanks from one base to another. And the army's like, no, this is what we do all the time. We move vehicles and stuff. Yeah. But they extrapolate that into some fear-based Orwellian hypothesis that is not really happening. Just the same as perhaps the COVID virality and mortality is not really happening. But someone who doesn't believe in the COVID mortality, because in the statistics have kind of shown that, they might think that they're better, but they might be just as fucking afraid of some other thing and acting just the same way about some other aspect of what the state's going to do and what the government's going to do. And they're still infected with fear. It's just a different avenue. And we all have fear. We're all afraid of different things, and that's okay.
And we all have blind spots.
Blind spots, exactly.
And I think that is a freaking like gold medal mindful point. Like the inner Zen master can say like, okay, you're not afraid of COVID. Are you afraid of the opposite thing that's in your blind spot? So let's be aware. Cool. And I think that hits the nail for me. I have been afraid of our rights being taken away. I didn't really buy into like, dude, there's army tanks in the streets of San Diego. Maybe go fuck yourself and do your little gossip. But yeah, I've been afraid of our rights taken away. And in that, I would say that at times, and hopefully I've been able to outgrow this, I've been able to like, look down on people who, you're afraid of those initial projections. Like, it's silly that you still believe that. Meanwhile, it's like, oh, I'm just scared of this thing in my blind spot. That's a different thing than what my eyes are looking at.
Right.
So I love that Zen awareness of yours.
People will use that to make themselves better. Like if we can be not afraid of something that somebody else is, but then we can be like, oh, well, I shit on this person because look how courageous I am and look how I'm not afraid. But meanwhile, they're still terrified of something else. And conversely, the other person can be like, well, yeah, all right, I'm afraid of this virus, but I'm certainly not afraid of the vaccine or afraid of the fucking tanks rolling in. And so it doesn't matter. Let's just look at everything calmly, rationally. Certainly there's concerns about the virus. Certainly there's concerns about our freedom and our liberties taken away. Certainly there's concerns about mandatory policies telling us what we should do with our own bodies. I have those concerns, but everything needs to be like de-escalated and looked at like, yeah, all right, if we start veering that way, all right, we need to let our voices be heard in either way, but it's just let them be heard in a calm, inclusive way, not shaming somebody for their particular flavor of fear.
Yep. Where you just have emotionally reactive conversations, nothing logical. It's like, okay, when we're emotionally reactive as our most political conversations, and obviously COVID's unfortunately become politicized, but when we see people just being emotionally reactive, we realize those are scared people. They're obviously not behaving like intelligent, respectful adults. And there's a good reason why that's happening, because they're scared, which makes them emotional, which means they're these probably genius people. They're not using their prefrontal cortex because in that moment, they're acting out of fear. And I do want you to know, a part of me does feel better about myself because I'm not afraid of not washing my hands like you, Aubrey. I'm going to ride that one out for another little while. And I'm just going to like feel the power I get from that. But we're going to make amends before too long.
Should I wear a badge just signifying that I'm subservient to your mastery of that?
Yes.
Would that be better? Maybe I could tattoo my hands.
If it's not too much
just
to ask.
Coward. just tag JP Sears.
You should actually tattoo the word washed on your hands. That way your hands are always washed. So, but to your point, recently I put out a video. It went viral. It's called "What It's Like to Believe Everything the Media Tells You." It took me and basically in that, the goal is to help wake people up from being in a fear trance. And it took me a while to be able to make that video because I had to get right with my own fears, my fears of rights being taken away, my fears of like, why is Bill Gates so concerned with vaccinating everybody? like, and I don't know, but that was a fear, and that fear of mandatory vaccines. Like I love the idea of vaccines, but I want it to be a choice. So I had to deal with those fears for a while before I could be level-headed enough to make a video that was hopefully good communication and served people. Otherwise, it would have just been misdirected anger from my undealt with fears. But as I able to get right with like, yeah, I'm afraid of these things. Aware of it, own it, process it. Cool. JP's got a little more prefrontal cortex online, and I do mean only a little.
And I think it's such a gift, and I think it's one of the reasons why the video, went viral and did so well. Viral is a funny word to use for that, but like, but why the video?
Went COVID. Shut the country down because of my video.
There's a good reason. It's because laughter. I mean, even if you talk to Tim Kennedy or talk to anybody who's been in service, like laughter is the way to de-escalate a scary ass situation.
Yeah.
You know, like the moment you can laugh about it is the moment where you can start to restore some prefrontal cortex and start to be like, all right, you know, like let's just calm down here and think rationally, think logically, and make the best choices about what to do. And so laughter is such a gift in this situation. And, you know, it's funny that people find like they'll kind of lash out against people who are de-escalating because they're so attached to that. But it's essential. It's essential for us to actually make the next best step is to de-escalate. We have to do that. So we have to laugh. So we have to celebrate like comedy, and we have to celebrate the ability to look at things and have like a few laughs.
I agree, man. You know, we need to de-escalate our emotional charges one way or another. Laughter is one way. Breathing is another way, which, by the way, laughter gets you breathing. So it helps with that. Sometimes having open, honest conversations. Honestly, sometimes you got to go outside and fucking scream.
Yep.
Sometimes you got to work out. A lot of ways to de-escalate our emotional volatility that happens inside of us. It's like it happens for all of us. The question is, do we deal with it or not? And it's just like the last soldier you'd want to be in a foxhole with is the emotionally reactive one.
Totally.
Soldier who you do want to be in the foxhole with is the one who is, their pulse is 72. It's like the Tim Kennedy, there's fire underway, but he's calm, which means you're going to be making the best decisions. Nobody makes better decisions with panic. That's why in the olden days when movies were shown on film that was made out of a highly flammable material, there were unfortunately fires in movie theaters more frequently than today. So what they would find is when there was a fire in a movie theater, what typically killed more people was the panic about it. Someone screaming fire rather than the fire. So it teaches us about our nature. We don't make better decisions when we're panicked, when we're emotionally volatile. That's why we need to de-escalate it.
No
like
doubt.
You said.
And it applies to so many things. Rogan's always said that emotions are not a fighter's friend. You know, he's been commentating for the UFC. And when you see it all the time, when you see people really like super emotional as they're going into the walkout and they're fucking beating their chest, they're clearly overcoming their own fear and like using their own portrayal of aggression to get them to do something that's ostensibly incredibly scary. You know, not just from the physical danger, but your career, your livelihood, your value, your internal values as a man, people watching you either get beat up or win. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing that all these fighters do. And the ones that are the scariest are like Fedor Emelianenko back in the day, just fucking
Stoic.
Ice cold. Or another version of that was Israel Adesanya when he just busts out some crump dancing beforehand. He's so relaxed that he's just fucking, and even Tony Ferguson is like that. He's just breakdancing on his way down and he's the fucking boogeyman. Yeah. I mean, granted, he lost to Gaethje recently, but he doesn't mean that he's not the boogeyman. It was still an incredible fucking performance of heart and will. He's just, the skills didn't match up right. But those are the people that are terrifying. You see that in the great champions. You know, they'll be breathing or smiling or dancing or like Fedor cold. And it's like, that person is fucking scary.
Yeah.
Like really scary because they're going to be thinking rationally and reacting. And even Conor was so confident, you know, like his confidence and his belief just created this aura around him of like, and that's the people, those are the people who are really, really scary to deal with, you know, and that's because they're able to use the full faculty. You know, even Cody No Love, when he was beating, Dominic Cruz, right? He was doing little dances and smiling and he was just like so alive and in the moment, contrasted with when he was fighting TJ and he was fucking pissed. He just wanted to take his head off. He wasn't just peppering and dancing. I think at one point against Dominic, Cody pulls out his tattooed guns out of his thing and shoots his own feet. I was like, that dude is on fire. You know, like that's what, because he's responding in a way that's going to give him an advantage without that kind of wash of fear.
Yeah, man. And I would almost dare say, if we look at some of those great fighters, and I think that can bring up a bit of a flow state conversation. And I'm not a flow stateologist yet. I know when I'm in a flow state, it's magical. And for me, I hit it easiest when I'm on stage. And I think one of the ingredients is there's a certain level of fear, but one of the ingredients is not succumbing to the fear and getting all worked up about it and making decisions and having my mindset view the lens of fear. But it's like, oh no, there's a level of fear. Like there's hundreds of people here to see me. And so it's kind of like playing without a net. So there's a level of pressure that necessitates a rise to the occasion to be so fucking present in the moment that, you know, I can just own a room and you see fighters just like Anderson Silva back in the day when he would just like do these small, seemingly slow head movements to dodge punches like he's fucking Neo in the Matrix. So I think that relationship with fear, those fighters who aren't succumbing to the fear, I think there's fear there, but the fear isn't what they're looking through. Right. The fear, it's like a passenger in the car.
Yeah.
It's like it's in the back pocket. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the driver.
They're not sociopaths. They're not superheroes who are incapable of being afraid. But the one in the flow state, the one performing amazingly, I think has the best relationship with fear.
No doubt, man. No doubt. Well, since we brought it up, I was hoping to interview the one who believes everything the media tells him. Can we get that guy for an interview within the interview?
Yeah, in fact, that's me. I've just this whole time been pretending like I can think for myself. So, man, I did my morning routine of watching the news this morning so I could get the latest death count and like recalibrate with how scared I need to be today. So, yeah, I'm happy to dive into this.
All right, well let's start. You know, I'm just a podcaster, and I had a philosophy major, so I liken myself
without a mask, by the way.
Yeah,
I don't know why. This is attempted homicide. Let me get my fucking lawyer on the phone.
There are 5 people in the room, which is right at the limit.
I didn't see him. Oh, I was too afraid to look behind me.
So as I say, I'm just a podcaster, you know, philosopher, you know, so I'm just looking at some facts and figures and just trying to ask some questions. So I just hope that I could ask some questions. Hopefully you could, you know, give your opinion and maybe clear some things up.
Tell you the facts.
Yes. So, you know, initially what the media was saying was that, you know, we're looking at a couple million dead and, you know, mortality rates were, you know, above 4%. And, you know, based on what we're actually seeing with the real mortality rates are considerably lower. A study done in California of 863 people said that there's at least 28 times more cases than we imagined, which means the mortality rate is lower. Extrapolating that, it's actually instead of 4%, maybe like between 0.1 and 0.2%. So, you know, orders of magnitude, less scary than we initially believed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you, Aubrey, that new study is completely irrelevant to me. And I'll tell you why. Because I made up my mind when I was most scared in the beginning when they told me the original death numbers coming in. So like anything else after that, like I'm not willing to believe. It just doesn't feel safe enough to change my mind.
So it didn't shake you at all that, you know, things had to be
in one ear and out the other. It meant fuck all to me.
Yeah, I understand. That makes sense.
And I also use those new studies. The only thing I'll acknowledge about them is I'll use those studies to justify that the lockdown is working because the death rate is lower because of the lockdown, which makes me believe the lockdown should last forever.
It's really the safest way to prevent COVID, it seems, is just to lock down forever. But don't 100%. You see that there's a lot of other costs society-wide and worldwide that might be causing?
Absolutely not. I mean, I hear some extremists, like doctors talking about deaths of despair. I say, good. Those people dying of depression and suicide and poverty aren't going to die of COVID anymore, which means technically they've been saved from COVID because they died of something else. I think it's helping the cause.
Yeah, it's definitely an opinion for sure. But speaking of deaths.
No, it's the absolute truth because I'm frightened as I believe it.
That is a way to justify a lot of things for sure. All right. So if we're looking at deaths, the just from an economic cost-benefit analysis, the University of Cambridge says that in the most optimistic case, this is going to cost the world economy $3.3 trillion, the economic impact of the lockdown and the quarantine and everything. In the worst case, it could be up to $82 trillion, depending on the recession or depression, which might be subsequently following. But somewhere in that range, it's a wide range, but $3.3 trillion, let's use a low estimate. You look at deaths overall, the World Bank and WHO, they estimate that for clean water and sanitation for the whole world, it would cost $101 billion and $6.7 billion over 15 years, which would then save 3.4 million people who die of water-related diseases, most of which are children. So if we took a fraction of what we're spending and what's costing us for COVID, we could actually have clean water for the world and save 3.5 million people, mostly kids, every year. Do you think it's that a factor in the conversation?
First off, you strike me as the kind of guy that wears a mask while you're driving in your car. So let's get that straight. And that's the only thing I like about you. Second off, you don't understand people dying of starvation, people dying of unclean water. That's not in the news. So it's not what I'm afraid of. What I'm afraid of is what the news is telling me day after day after day. Everything else doesn't exist to me because if I don't hear and see it on the news, it doesn't exist. And I think it's irresponsible of you bringing up these other issues because it's almost like you're trying to get more people to die of COVID by saving more lives in these other areas.
Yeah, that is irresponsible of me to do that. I just wonder, I question whether, perhaps the media has some vested incentive in gluing people to the media because that's how they sell advertisements and that's how they make money. And so it's of their own economic benefit to be talking about something that's really scary versus something that we're kind of used to. Do you think the media could be biased in what they're presenting?
There's only two people on the planet who are out for your own good: Catholic priests and the media. So the media are journalists. They're here presenting and helping us shape how we perceive the world. Like what are you going to do? Like use your own mind to interpret the world without the media? No, you're not going to do that. So the media is helping you have an understanding of how you should see the world in your own best interest for your safety in a way that serves them.
Yeah, definitely also an opinion.
This fucking guy. Do you guys actually like him? Goon face, broken nose, diseased hand.
Call me Septimus Prime. All right. Well, we mentioned food. You brought that up. I was going to talk about that next. 9 million people die of hunger in a normal year. There's some estimates from the World Food Program that 130 million people will be pushed to the brink of starvation because of our, sanctions on everything. And they're estimating. Beasley, the director, says that could mean 300,000 extra people die a day for a certain period if we don't rectify some of these issues. And if you actually look at what it would cost to feed the world and prevent those 9 million deaths and whatever other subsequent deaths might be caused from the economic downturns and the disruptions in supply chain and all the things that are happening, we're actually talking considerably more than that. It would cost between $7 billion for a targeted nutritional intervention, including different education on breastfeeding and different programs, up to $265 billion for a full feeding program and investment in the infrastructure. But they also say that it could increase global GDP to save all those lives and have people fed by up to $276 billion. So it'd kind of be a wash. But in either case, that's another 10 million people that we could save, 9 million people and whatever other additional people we could save if we allocated some of these resources to food. So in combination, we're talking already like 13 million people a year we could save if we just allocated some of those resources to clean water and food.
It's the longest fucking question of my life. But I'll tell you this, Aubrey. When you're looking at starvation, you're so narrow-minded. Like we haven't found a cure for starvation yet. But luckily, our good friend Bill Gates is working on a vaccine to cure starvation. I think it's really our only hope. And by the way, one of the things that I love most about Bill Gates is that I trust him 100% because he wears sweaters over collared shirts. This
like
guy,
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, 100%. And this guy, like, He's such an altruistic fella. We look at our friend Bill. In 1999, the federal government sues him in an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft, and he was found guilty of creating a monopoly, presumably because he's so power hungry and wants a sense of control. Then the next year, in the year 2000, he started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which now controls the World Health Organization. So in just 1 year, he went from a power-hungry person the federal government was having to sue because he's breaking the laws, to all of a sudden, 1 year later, an altruistic fella that just wants to save everybody around the world through his vaccines.
He found Jesus.
He found Jesus, and that's why we can trust our friend Bill. So the idea like you want to feed hungry people food, bro, Bill's not talking about that. Watch the news to see what Bill's talking about. He's talking about vaccines. That's why, like, he's not a doctor. He doesn't have a medical degree, which means he's not indoctrinated in the corrupt medical system because he doesn't have any medical training. It means he knows more about medicine than anybody else. So Bill's talking about vaccines. It's just like when my future child is born, if he gets sick, I'm not taking him to a doctor. I'm not an idiot. I'll take him to the Apple store and have a computer programmer take a look at him.
Yeah, that's another strategy. I don't know what to say. It's just it's an interesting strategy. I have a couple other things I'd love for you to comment on.
Hopefully they're longer questions than the last one.
Domestic abuse deaths have gone way up. There's some reports that they tripled in China, doubled in the UK. My sister, who works as a CASA, court-appointed special advocate with kids, says that in the area that she has purview over, there's been a 400% increase in child domestic abuse deaths. And there's also a massive level of underreporting with schools closed because 2/3 of reporting of domestic abuse of children is done by teachers, coaches, daycare people. So this is just one of the ancillary costs that the media is just not really covering the same way they're covering the COVID death count.
I literally didn't hear a word that you said because you didn't say anything that my brain has been trained with from the news. So I just heard silence.
All right, fair enough. Well, we'll go on. Suicides is another thing that, has actually, some people have talked about it. And Oxford University research says that suicide rates rise by 1% for every percentage point of unemployment, which means that we're looking at potentially an extra 20,000 additional suicide deaths because of the rise in unemployment that has been caused. So that's just another 20,000 people taking their own life.
Yeah, but what we need to understand is we are saving millions, probably billions, potentially trillions of lives through the lockdown. And I'll tell you, an idiot friend of mine, he one time had this conspiracy theory that back in the day, Bill Gates realized like he can no longer use Microsoft as the vehicle to take over the world. Once he was found guilty, the government broke that up. So the very next year, he formed the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to be the new vehicle that he uses to take over the world, more power and control. And because he disguised it in a way where he's helping people, that actually trains the world to help him take more of their power and their control and their personal sovereignty. But I told him, like, bro, the guy's a billionaire, not a trillionaire. He's not smart enough to do that. So he's a conspiracy theorist, just a complete idiot.
Wacko, huh?
Yeah, he does not watch the news.
Addiction. Let's just keep going. Keep talking about all these things. 67% more alcohol sales according to the tax receipts. So, alcohol is really one of the major scourges on people's physical health and also causes a lot of accidents and violent behavior. And it's just going way up in response to everything that has been mandated. Is that a concern for you at all?
Well, it is. And I think as a society, if we band together and get these alcoholics onto opioids in the medical system, I think we'll really be able to help them deal with the pain that's driving them to drink in the first place.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. All right, well, let's just keep going. You're doing such a good job addressing all my concerns here.
Thank you. I want you to know that I'm blacked out with fear right now. I am not aware of my own consciousness. My soul is potentially left my body. I couldn't be more terrified, but I feel safer the more terrified I am.
Good. One of the things that people have been really afraid of is these hospitals getting overwhelmed. And, there's lots of stories about this. And, certainly we've seen that from moments in Italy and potentially moments in New York where there was a surge. But nonetheless, if you look at the Labor Department statistics, the hospitals had to lay off 1.4 million healthcare workers in April because the hospitals were actually not at capacity and they didn't have work. So they had to furlough their employees and doctors and healthcare workers, and people on the front lines had to get laid off in April. So what's going on there?
You're basically talking about a flat earth, Mr. Conspiracy Theorist. If you want to get an accurate assessment of what's going on in U.S. hospitals, all you need to do is look once again at the picture of the hospitals in Italy. Like, after that, you don't need to understand anything new, more updated information or what's going on locally, because remember that picture? It's so scary.
Yeah, doctors having to choose who lives or dies. That's something that's a memorable story.
I've got it as a screensaver on my phone so that I'll never forget.
I understand.
And I was frightened when I saw it the first time, so I can't forget.
All right, well, let's talk about a couple other things. There's some people who are concerned about censorship, people with dissenting opinions, people who are, raising questions and providing an alternate hypothesis to mainstream news. Their videos are often getting taken off of YouTube, and people are worried that this is a violation of the freedom of speech.
Well, the World Health Organization is teaching YouTube and Facebook what the appropriate health guidelines are with information like 5G and the coronavirus. So luckily, any information that's not correct information, which means any information that's someone else's information other than the World Health Organization, is dangerous and should be censored because it will kill people.
Okay. I see your point there. I don't necessarily agree with that. People are also concerned about potential Orwellian measures, mandatory vaccines, phone tracking, chipping. People are worried that this is going to be this kind of initial step that's going to get people to sacrifice their freedom in order for an increased sense of safety.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I am so willing to sacrifice my freedoms now so that I won't die. And I've never seen Braveheart. So the idea that people will eventually die in the name of their freedoms, that's not part of me. I'm very weak, so I'm not even willing to do that. So when I look at the idea of mandatory vaccines, two things. First off, I hope they come about without long-term human trials, because those long-term human trials to prove safety and effectiveness, it's just unnecessary bragging. I say let's be humble, not just rub it in people's faces how effective these vaccines are. Let's just start using them. And two, I hope the vaccines come with microchips, for our own good, of course. And I don't want to sound greedy, but I'd like to ask them for 2 microchips if I could, because I want to be extra safe. Literally, if you told me to run out in traffic, but it's for my own good, I would do it.
I feel you, man. Personal health is the last thing I just wanted to talk about. I mean, it's a lot of the measures, people staying at home, people overeating, people drinking alcohol. It's lowering their own immunity. Also, there's concerns about the innate immunity that comes up from actually exposing yourself to different things with all the hand washing, the masking. People are worried about long-term consequences, and also worried about some of these things that, like exercise being limited, gyms being closed, everything, all the things that actually support a robust and healthy system. Like I talked about in my book, Own the Day, all of these different practices that can actually get you to a position where you're in the vast majority of people that exhibit fewer symptoms and are able to deal with this virus. That's actually being depressed. So we're actually more vulnerable, not only to this virus, but every other virus and every other threat that might come about. So do you see any concern with, focusing on one thing to the detriment of our overall health and making us at risk for everything else?
No, that's incorrect information. I have never once seen on the news anything that suggests that we have influence over our own health and our immunity. Have the aliens landed yet? Come on, bro. the only hope we have for our health, the only thing we can do is hope they can come up with a vaccine that will protect our health. There's nothing else we can do.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure interviewing you.
I think I got diabetes during this conversation, and it's not my fault.
Thank you. I'll take JP back now, please.
Boom.
Wow.
How was it dealing with that fucker, Aubrey?
It was actually pretty funny. I'm not a comic genius because I could not stay in character at all. I had nothing to say except laugh. And but nonetheless, like, look, all of us, as I said, humor is really important. And understand that was a comic sketch. Yes, the facts that I read, are supported and have studies around them. But nonetheless, like, we have to just look at these things, have a laugh, like, and just analyze the whole picture. We're not saying that COVID's not real. You're the person that whose father got diagnosed, he's in a bad way. There's some bad shit that's happening. And there are some healthcare workers who are really fucking stressed and really busting their ass and like spending a ton of time, dealing with different concerns. All of that is real. And all of that is like part of the picture. When my parents got pneumonia, just a normal case of pneumonia, and they were waiting on their tests, like, that shit's scary. My parents are in their 70s, like, all of these factors are also real. And we're not saying like we need to disregard all measures, like, all right, there's some things that are reasonable, but unless we're actually looking at everything, there's no balance that can be struck, and there's no logic that can be utilized. So it's just like taking everything holistically and saying like, let's just look at everything.
Yeah. That is it. Look at everything. Not, as we had fun within that sketch, looking at just what the news tells us, that's not everything. And I don't want to get pessimistic about the news yet. I think a person getting their news from the news is like getting financial advice from a broke person. Like, it's called the news, but it might not be the best source of news. And, there was a podcast Tony Robbins put out.
It's great.
You listen to it.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. 2.5
Facts Over Fear, I think it's called.
Yeah. 2.5 hours. I mean, people, please check it out.
Nobel Prize winners on there. A bunch of doctors,
head of the Cleveland
epidemiologists.
Clinic, 100%. The doctors that got banned from YouTube for voicing like, hey, here's what we're seeing here on the front lines after dealing with 5,000 patients. So those doctors, and for me, it was a single best source of information. I think it would take dozens and dozens of hours to decipher through to get that information through other sources. And to me, the beautiful thing about that podcast is they weren't emotionally charged. They weren't like, hey, here's the conspiracies, or screw them for having a lockdown. They were saying like, no, here's what we know and our opinion based on what we know with the latest information. So super informative. And that was a great source of news.
No doubt. And that's the beautiful part about the world we live in, is that there's multiple different sources. And even the concerns about censorship, all right, YouTube's doing it, but podcasts haven't been fucked with. And even if they did, there would be new. It's almost like when the best way to make a book like a worldwide sensation is to ban it.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to make sure that shit is fucking everywhere, because people are going to wonder why you banned it. And I think you've seen that with a lot of the stuff that's been banned. It's been the most successful things that have kind of come up, because whenever you resist something, it proliferates. What you resist is something that persists and grows. And that's old wisdom that I don't think we've learned here. That's like, if they weren't afraid of those opinions, they would just let them go. And if those opinions, it's like they're not removing flat earth videos from YouTube. There's fucking plenty of those, and that's total nonsense.
I've got one on there. I fucking love it. When I don't know what it was, a couple months ago at this point, when I got the notification at the back end of YouTube on YouTube Studio saying, this is paraphrased, but they said, we're going to censor you and we're taking down videos, and you could get strikes against your account for people who are posting. It was information on 5G and the coronavirus that doesn't align with the World Health Organization standards. When I saw that, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like it's for the people. And then now we're getting so many examples, London Real being majorly censored on YouTube, and these doctors having their being censored. it's a concern for me. And, not just like me as like a professional, that's not what I'm talking about, but it's a concern for me for humanity and our freedoms. And there was a headline 2 days ago, my wife showed me, where Trump declared he's going to go after the social media giants for censoring people's speech. And I love that. It's weird. Like now, I think like the hippie population that's been so fucking anti-Trump for the past 4 years now, like, and I'm not saying like, hey, I'm pro-Trump. I'm saying I'm pro some of the things Trump's doing, like withdrawing funding from the World Health Organization. That's something like the new age hippie crowd that normally just dogmatically hates Trump. We're like, oh, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's like people are really robust and intricate people with flaws and things. They're not. You can't just categorize a person as one thing. And it's also, I think it's also important too, because so many people, if you can account for something based on ignorance and based on fear and based on personal greed and motivation, you don't have to hypothesize a conspiracy.
Yeah.
The fact, like Trump's actions, wouldn't he be in on the conspiracy? First of all, he's whatever this hypothesis is, he's uber wealthy, elitist, and the president. You'd think he'd be part of it, but his actions are like, no, he's just a dude trying to figure it out with a massive ego and some other shit. But he's made tons of mistakes, and he's ignorant in a multiplicity of ways. Sure. Like, granted, all that, but he's not acting conspiratorially in any of this. Yeah. And so it's like, don't allow this idea of some nefarious Illuminati deep state organization to account for something that you could just account from simple greed or simple lust for power or simple ignorance. Like all of these things can account for everything that's going on.
From my delusional point of view, where, to me it appears, and this is looking at things through headlines, articles, the news. So is it accurate? Who the hell knows? And it's through my delusional perspective anyway. Yet it, to me, seems as though Trump is acting in a rational way towards the lockdown. He's like refusing to wear masks. He's, supporting Elon, like, yes, open up the Tesla factory, go Elon, and saying we need to open up the country. Let's have the social media giants stop censoring individuals' speech. When I look at that, I'm like, why is he not behaving as though he's bought and paid for?
Right.
In my own stupid hypothesis, I look at it and say like, well, maybe here's why. He's an outsider. He's not a politician, still not a fucking politician. He's their president, but he's an outsider. He came to the table with more wealth and fame than any of these other politicians will ever have. And it's the wealth, the fame, and the symbols of power that go with that I would dare say causes a politician to be susceptible for corruption. Like, like whether is this true? I don't know, but let's just pretend our lockdown is longer than what is in our best interests. If that's true, we have to ask, like, then who's acting against our best interest? Is there corruption going on? I don't know, but it's a valid question. But here's Trump, the cowboy, trying to like open everything back up. And I just wonder, is it because his ego is essentially above all this politician bribery? He's like, motherfuckers, I got more money than you. I've got more fame than you. And guess what? I'm in a position of power that's above your position. So no, I'm going to do what I want. I don't know.
Who knows, man? And I think the important thing is to recognize, like, we have to just look at these things without our preconceived notions, without our biases. And like, whether you like somebody as a person or, you could make a very good argument that he's misogynistic, that he's a bit racist. You could make all those arguments. They're all fair. Doesn't mean that everything he says is going to be wrong. Yeah. And it's like, that's the thing we do. We try to make somebody, we'll find one flaw that they have, or, someone will look at Jordan Peterson. They'll find one snippet of one thing he said about women and something possibly out of context, possibly not. And then they'll try and disregard the entire body of his work.
Yeah.
Based on that one thing, right? It's like, no, like even one of my favorite philosophers, Carlos Castaneda, he was a fucking crazy person. You know, like if you read the personal history of him, like he might have convinced his girlfriends to bury themselves alive when he died.
Jesus.
He might have convinced them of that. Like, that's fucked up. Does it mean...
is that wrong? Because I've got an agreement with my wife. But go on, it's just your opinion.
Like, doesn't mean that you can't read, you know, the Wheel of Time and get some actionable wisdom from that. Like, we got to just kind of disregard and just take everything individually. Like, what is this thing? What is this thing? What is this thing? And not make... You're not a conspiracy theorist or a not. You're not a denier or a not. You're just a person trying to figure shit out. And that's what we're all doing. And if we just do that, then we can start identifying with the humanity that's within us rather than the things that we allow our mind to make somebody inhuman for.
Yeah.
You know, which is what we do in war when we're trying to call somebody a Charlie or call like, you know, a commie or a fucking whatever. We try to dehumanize them so that we can point our guns and shoot them without any qualms because we've made them lesser than us. But it's not true, you know, and that's why the story of the people playing soccer on Christmas during World War, like they're like, fuck. Yeah. We just played a soccer match with the people we're trying to blow up and throw gas on every day. Like, damn, they're just like us. And that's the thing that just kind of undermines like all of this kind of politicization and all of the basis for war and separation.
I think when we categorize someone into the bad person category because we find the one thing, like, you're not inclusive towards redheads. Fuck you. You're an entirely bad person. I think we do that because we're mentally lazy. We don't want to actually now think about other things they have to say and explore the nuances, which takes brain energy that we either don't have or don't want to devote. But I would dare say there's probably not a single person on planet Earth that you truly don't like everything about. You know, some people there will be more than others, but a friend of mine the other night, we were having similar conversation, and he, in a very open-minded way, he said, I bet there's things about Hitler you would like. And that's like almost controversial. I was like, cool, I'm not about killing people. That's not the thing I like. But he's probably right. Like, maybe he's nice to his cat. It's like, cool. I like it when people are nice to animals and they treat them well. So, and Hitler's an extreme example, yet when we look at anybody that we're just throwing in that, you're in the dipshit box, off.
Any good movie has a villain that has some characteristics that humanize them. Like, that's like all the great art is about that. Like, that's why the Joker movie was so revolutionary, right? It was like, you saw the human being in this maniacal, supervillain. And then that makes a huge impact. And I think we're starting to see that. And I think the Joker was a really pivotal movie for that, because usually the Joker is just, this is a, maniac, homicidal killer who's just out for chaos, like Bane. Bane was a very flat character, but it was a great character, but it was not as interesting as this Joker, which is, showing the human side of it. And I think we got to look at that at always and just recognize that every single person is a person, and every single life matters, whether we're seeing it or not. Like, everything counts,
And to me, that's the energy of compassion, love, and connection, not the energy of fear and separation.
Yeah.
And that to me, I feel weird saying this. The Joker movie was a movie about compassion. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, you get to know the character. And when you get to know the human underneath the behavior, that's compassion.
Yep. That's it.
Because we're talking about politics, Aubrey, can I share a joke with you?
Please.
I just wrote this, I think it was yesterday. It is a joke meant for the stage, so there's not going to be an audience. It won't be funny here. But I'm an equal opportunity.
We will all judge you for it and cast you out of our comic pantheon.
Observe how I'm not funny, but take my word, I'm funny. I've been on the news. So anyway, you can watch the news and see I'm funny on the news. So to my fucking joke, I'm an equal opportunity offender, so I'm going to offend both sides as part of the joke. So I've got a joke I do on stage where I'm talking about how food is like people. And I go through how different foods are going through the same social issues that different groups of people are going through, like tofurkey. It's the transgender of the food community. It's like, I used to be a plant, but now I identify as meat. And gluten's the Donald Trump of food. Half our country's intolerant, yet we chose to eat, didn't we? And alcohol's the Joe Biden of the food world. It's connected to impaired speech. And Joe Biden is the human equivalent of roofies, as roofies are connected to memory loss and sexual assault. Anyway, I just wrote that ending last night. I'm like,
nice. That's good. Spread the jokes around. Spread the love around. Spread the jokes around. Like, it's time to just eliminate all of these different, silos. Let's just all recognize it's one team. It's team people on Team Earth. And like, it's fucking one team here. We're on one team. And like, let's love each other and not like fucking hate each other if we have a belief or an opinion or anything that comes out like that. Like, let's love each other. Let's all figure it out. Neither one of us are saying like, Corona's not real. We got to change everything. We shouldn't have done what we did. We don't know enough to do that, but we're just asking questions and looking at things and realizing that the question is not as nuanced and not as robust as it should be. And we feel called to make sure that the conversation is robust. We're not in any position to decide any policy. We're just here to ask questions and kind of point at things and then let the collective kind of sort it out. Like, all collectively, let's fucking figure this shit out in a rational way.
The only thing I know for sure is people shouldn't do what I think they should do. I think people should do what they think they should do.
Amen.
And I think them thinking for themselves, you might get some information from the news, but make sure you're making your choices based on your own thinking, because I think the miracle that each person is means they have a God-given innate intelligence and a free will that deserves to be expressed. I think it's disrespectful to wherever we came from to treat ourselves like a robot, to treat ourselves like a slave. And I think the only person that can enslave us, if you're lucky enough to live in a first world country, is yourself. And
unless you go to a kinky sex dungeon.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that still kind of, do this choice to me, please, and please don't videotape this, # Robert Kraft. And our friend Tim Kennedy, he raises a powerful dichotomy, which is you're either going to choose peaceful slavery or dangerous freedom. And of course, the choice is yours. How you live is your choice.
And that is your choice, honestly. Yeah. And like, it's up to us to honor that choice either way. And even if that is hard for us, even the people who are choosing peaceful slavery, can we love them the same way we love a Tim Kennedy who's choosing dangerous freedom and fighting for it? Can we? And that's our sadhana. That's our spiritual practice, to love every single person, even the people who are offended by this podcast or offended by your latest video and write some scathing comment about how we are personally responsible for the death of somebody else because of something we said. Like, even that person, like, can we love that person? And that's our spiritual practice.
100%.
That's our invitation.
And because that truly is a spiritual practice, I think when we look at people that disagree with us, whether it's about, this pandemic issue, or disagree with us about politics, religion, or how to raise a child, what if we looked at those people that disagree with us and said, thank God for their disagreement? That is a more powerful catalyst of love than people who agree with me. Because when we look at people that we disagree with, now we have the opportunity for unconditional acceptance. Can I accept you even though we don't agree? And it's beautiful. It's love. It's connection. If we do, when people agree with us, we don't have that adversity to strengthen our unconditional love expression.
Yep.
We don't have to accept them for any differences. And I think people that we agree with, they're comfortable, and that's typically who we surround ourselves with most. But I think the people that disagree with us are more beneficial to us. And can we be respectful, kind, and most of all, accepting towards them, even though we disagree? By the way, I'll go on record and say, if everybody completely agreed with you, the world would be so shitty. It'd be so boring. There wouldn't be diversity. Like, there wouldn't be different kinds of music. There wouldn't be different opinions. There wouldn't be growth. There wouldn't be expanded learning. So thank God people disagree with us. And can we view them with acceptance, not rejection?
Boom. Nailed it. So good to talk to you, man.
Oh, so good to talk with you, brother.
YouTube channel. What's they can obviously search JP Sears, but what's the actual link?
Awaken with JP on YouTube and all the social medias.
And podcast.
Indeed. Yeah. Podcast Awaken with JP Sears. It's in all the spots if you want to check it out. You've been on there a couple times, most recently as well. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, real pleasure, brother.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Continue. I know both of us have personally had a beautiful, personally had a beautiful kind of quarantine experience. Obviously, you're pregnant and that's all going on, and you and your wife are having a beautiful experience. I'm engaged now and I'm having a beautiful experience. And so, there's even in the midst of this large external, I think there's a lot of people who are finding like real beauty amidst the resistance and the chaos. So may that continue for you, my friend.
Yeah. And you too, brother.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Much love. Peace. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. Also, share with any friend that you think might benefit from it. And lastly, go to aubreymarcus.com, sign up for my newsletter diary, and you won't miss a thing.